Some killers murder, some rage, but some don't stop after death. In Wisconsin, police entered a farmhouse and found something else, not a crime scene, a broken mind. He was quiet, invisible, until it was too late. Silas Mercer, the Black Hollow Butcher.
In my career, I'd seen murder scenes, overdose scenes, suicides, domestic violence, executions, and accidents so brutal they barely looked real. But there are only a few places I've entered that never left me. One of them stood at the end of Black Hollow Road. This was northern Wisconsin, isolated farmland, heavy woods, bitter winters, and the kind of silence that makes people lock their doors without knowing why. It was the late 1970s, and the town of Ash Creek was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, or thought they did. The house sat back from the road, half hidden behind dead pines and overgrown brush. It looked abandoned from a distance, peeling paint, sagging porch, broken fencing, but it wasn't abandoned. A man named Silas Mercer lived there alone. He was in his early 50s, thin, stooped, soft-spoken, rarely made eye contact. He kept to himself, rarely stayed in town long, and spoke in a strange, halting way as if he were translating thoughts from somewhere far away. Most people described him with the same word: odd. But odd is a word small towns use when they sense danger they can't yet prove. Long before the police ever searched his house, there were whispers about Silas Mercer. Not accusations, just unease. People said his mother had controlled every part of his life. They said she treated the outside world like filth, especially women. They said Silas was raised in near total isolation, taught that desire was corruption, that people were wicked, and that sin lived everywhere outside the walls of that farmhouse. When she died, something in him didn't simply break. Something in him was set loose. The investigation began with a missing woman. Her name was Helen Crow, a 58-year-old widow who owned the local hardware and supply store in Ash Creek. She was sharp, practical, well-liked, and not the sort of woman who vanished without explanation. On the night she disappeared, Helen had stayed late to close up the store. A few customers saw her just before 8:00 p.m. She was locking the front entrance, carrying the day's receipts, and preparing to head home. She never made it. The next morning, the store remained closed. Her truck was still parked out back. Her handbag was gone, but one of her gloves was found in the mud near the loading area. There were signs of a struggle, not dramatic, but wrong enough to set off alarms. That's when deputies were called in. At first, it looked like a straightforward abduction. No sign she'd run off voluntarily. No evidence of robbery. No obvious personal enemies. But on the wet ground behind the store, we found something important. A set of footprints leading away from the loading area and drag marks in the mud. Those tracks didn't head toward town. They led toward the tree line, and beyond the woods there was only one property nearby, Silas Mercer's farmhouse.
I've asked myself the same question 1,000 times. How do you know someone for almost 40 years and still never really know them? I met Silas when we were kids. I was maybe 11, maybe 12. My family had just moved to Ash Creek, and back then kids didn't need much to become friends. A dirt lot, an old ball, a free afternoon. But Silas never joined the others. He'd sit off by himself behind the church fence or under the old cottonwoods by Miller's Field, scratching shapes into the dirt with a stick. The first time I spoke to him, I asked what he was drawing. He covered it with his shoe and said, "Nothing." That was Silas. He always made it seem like the most important things were the things he refused to explain. Eventually, I kept talking to him because no one else really did. He wasn't me. Not then. Just disconnected. Like he was physically there, but mentally listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. I remember the first time I went to his house. His mother answered the door. I still remember her face. Hard eyes, tight mouth. She looked at me like I was something she'd found rotting in her pantry. The house itself felt wrong. Dim, stale, too quiet. Curtains drawn in the daytime. Religious pamphlets stacked on tables. No warmth, no laughter. No sign that a child was supposed to grow up there. After that, I understood why Silas was the way he was. He had been raised under someone else's shadow for so long, he never became fully himself. Or maybe he became exactly what that shadow made him. Years later, after his mother died, he changed. Before, he was withdrawn. After, he felt hollow, like all the wires inside him had burned out. He still spoke to me now and then, usually at the gas station or the feed store. Short conversations, awkward smiles, strange comments that didn't fully make sense. One night he told me, dead serious, "Some people don't stay buried in your head. They keep walking around." I laughed at the time. I don't laugh about it anymore.
We approached the Mercer property with a warrant. It was cold, gray, and dead quiet, the kind of afternoon where even the wind seems to be holding its breath. There was no vehicle in the driveway, but smoke stains on the chimney suggested the place had been used recently. We knocked, no answer. We knocked again, nothing. When we forced entry, the first thing that hit us wasn't what we saw. It was the smell. Rot, dampness, old fabric. Earth, something chemical, and beneath all of it a sweet, sickly note you never mistake once you've smelled it before. Death. The interior looked frozen in time. Dust, old furniture, stacks of newspapers, discolored wallpaper, a kitchen full of rusted utensils and dirty plates. But then there was something else, a strange duality to the place. Parts of it looked long abandoned, other parts looked carefully preserved, especially one bedroom. We later confirmed it had belonged to Silas's mother. The room looked untouched, almost shrine-like. Bed perfectly made. Personal items left exactly where they had once been. Hairbrush, old perfume bottle, Bible, slippers by the bed. It didn't look like a dead woman's room. It looked like a room waiting for her to return. And then we found the basement door. There are details from that basement I'm not going to describe explicitly. Some things don't need graphic language to be understood. They only need to be understood for what they were. Evidence that the man we were dealing with had long since crossed the line between deviance and complete psychological ruin. The basement was not a storage space. It was a private world, a constructed world. There were objects that at first glance looked domestic, household items, clothing, furniture, decorations. But the longer you looked, the more your brain fought against what your eyes were telling you. Nothing in that room felt accidental. Everything felt intentional, deliberate, curated. And in one section of the basement, among the debris and hidden compartments, we found personal belongings that belonged to Helen Crow. That was the moment the missing person case became something much larger. Because Helen wasn't the first, she was simply the first one that forced the door open.
I didn't want to come forward at first. Not because I didn't care, because I was afraid. People think old women don't notice things. That's not true. We notice more than most people. We've just learned when fear is smarter than courage. The night Helen disappeared, I was coming back from my daughter's place. I took the back road because it was quicker. I usually don't drive that way after dark, but I'd stayed too long and it was starting to sleet. As I turned near the woods, I saw a lantern or maybe a flashlight moving through the trees. Then I saw two people. One was a man, one was a woman. The woman wasn't walking right. That's what I remember first. Her steps were wrong, stumbling, dragging, like her legs weren't doing what she wanted them to do. I pulled over, killed my lights, and just watched. The man moved slowly, calmly. Not like someone panicking, like someone doing something familiar. When the light shifted, I saw his face. It was Silas Mercer. I'm sure of it. The woman had her head tilted forward. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I knew she wasn't there by choice. You can tell those things. Even from a distance, even in the dark, I should have called somebody right then. I know that. But fear can turn a grown woman into stone. The next morning, when they said Helen was missing, I knew what I'd seen. I just didn't want it to be true.
When the police first said Silas might be involved, I rejected it. I didn't just doubt it. I refused it. Because if they were right, then it meant I had missed something monstrous sitting in plain sight for years. And once that idea got into my head, memories started coming back. Little things I had brushed off. One time I stopped by his house unexpectedly. This was after his mother died. The front door was slightly open, and I heard something metallic from inside. When I stepped into the kitchen, Silas spun around so fast, he knocked a knife onto the floor. He looked terrified, not guilty, not embarrassed, terrified. I joked and said, "What are you hiding?" He got angry in a way I had never seen before. "Don't come in unannounced," he said. His voice had changed, lower, sharper, like I'd interrupted something sacred. On the table, there were scraps of old cloth, heavy thread, a pair of scissors, and something that looked like hair. I asked him what it was. He laughed too quickly and said, "Horse tail from a fence line." It wasn't horsehair. I know that now. Another time we were walking past the cemetery outside town. He stopped and stared through the iron gate for so long I had to call his name twice. Then he said, almost screaming, "Some people look better after the world stops touching them." I remember feeling a chill even then, but I let it go. That's the part I live with now. Not just what he did, but all the times I might have seen the edge of it and turned away.
What makes someone like Silas Mercer especially disturbing is that his crimes appear to come from multiple layers of psychological damage operating at once. First, there is severe developmental isolation. If a child grows up in an environment ruled by fear, shame, and rigid control, particularly around sex, identity, and the body, that child may fail to develop normal emotional boundaries. Other people cease to feel fully human. They become symbols, temptations, threats, objects. Second, there's pathological attachment. By all accounts, Silas's mother dominated his life and identity. If that attachment was unhealthy, obsessive, and fused with fear, then her death may have triggered not ordinary grief, but psychic collapse. He may not have experienced her loss as she is gone. He may have experienced it as the center of reality has been removed. That kind of collapse can produce bizarre rituals, delusions, identity disturbances, and attempts to reverse loss through control over bodies, objects, or symbolic replacements. Third, there is the possibility of psychosis or severe dissociation. When a person's inner world becomes more powerful than external reality, they stop interacting with people as people. They begin interacting with meanings, fantasies, hallucinated roles. That's when behavior can become grotesque. Not always because the person is driven purely by sadism, though sadism may be present, but because they are trying to build, restore, or possess something psychologically impossible. In that sense, Silas Mercer may not simply have been killing, he may have been reconstructing a world that had already collapsed in his mind. And that is what makes offenders like him so uniquely horrifying. They are not merely violent. They are spiritually and psychologically disassembled.
As the search continued, the evidence led beyond the farmhouse. We found disturbed earth at several graves in the old Ash Creek Cemetery. Not fresh graves, older ones, that told us something important. Whatever Silas Mercer had become, he hadn't become it overnight. This wasn't a sudden descent. It was a long, private progression, the kind that grows in silence, the kind nobody notices because nobody wants to imagine it. The cemetery evidence changed the scale of the case. We were no longer dealing with one missing woman or even one murder. We were looking at a pattern of acts rooted in obsession, desecration, and ritualized psychological wound. By then, Silas himself was missing. But he hadn't gone far. We found him in an abandoned slaughter shed about 2 miles from the farmhouse. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He didn't ask what we had found. He only looked at us and said, "I was trying to make it quiet again." No one in that room ever forgot that sentence because no one knew exactly what he meant. The house, his mind, his mother's voice, or the dead themselves? People imagine interrogations as dramatic, screaming denials, breakdowns, threats. But some of the worst ones are quiet. Silas Mercer was quiet. He answered some questions directly, refused others, occasionally smiled at things no one else found amusing. More than once, he seemed confused that we considered his actions monstrous. When we asked why Helen Crow had been taken, he said, "She reminded me of what was missing." I asked him who he meant. He didn't answer. I asked whether he meant his mother. That was the first moment his expression changed. He lifted his head, looked directly at me, and in a hard, almost childlike voice said, "Don't talk about her like you knew her." That response told us more than any confession could have. The women in his crimes were not random to him. They were filtered through whatever corrupted system his mind had built around purity, decay, loss, and replacement. In that system, his mother wasn't merely a parent. She was a fixed point, a shrine, possibly even a standard no living woman could ever meet. Everyone else became disposable by comparison. Among the items collected from the farmhouse were old reel-to-reel tapes and damaged cassette recordings. Most were warped by age and poor storage, but several contained intelligible speech. On one tape, Silas could be heard speaking softly to someone who wasn't there. He said, "The house gets cold when you leave." Then after a pause, "I can fix it. I know how to fix it." In another recording, a chair scraped across the floor, followed by what sounded like him addressing an empty room as though he were being answered. There was no second voice, only silence. And then Silas saying, "No, not yet. Not this one."
Those recordings strongly suggest the presence of a psychotic or quasi-psychotic inner life. Whether he was hallucinating, role-playing, dissociating, or consciously acting out a fantasy is something experts can debate. But what matters is that he no longer appeared tethered to ordinary interpersonal reality. That is crucial. Once a person is no longer engaging with reality, moral inhibition often collapses with it. And when that collapse combines with obsession, grief, isolation, and bodily fixation, the outcome can become deeply ritualized and profoundly inhuman.
There's one thing I didn't say at first, not because I was hiding it, because I didn't trust my own memory. When I saw them moving through the trees, I heard something, very faint. I thought it was wind, but later I realized it was the woman trying to speak. And then Silas leaned toward her, not violently. That's what chills me. He leaned toward her almost gently, like a father calming a child, or a nurse soothing someone in pain. That's what people don't understand about evil. It doesn't always look wild. Sometimes it looks patient. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it puts a hand on your shoulder before it destroys you.
After they arrested him, I couldn't sleep for weeks. I kept replaying every conversation, every silence, every strange sentence I'd ignored because it was easier than asking what it meant. I even went to see him once. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to hear him say it was all a mistake. Maybe some stupid part of me still thought the boy I met under the cottonwoods was still in there somewhere. He looked smaller behind the glass, calmer too. That was the worst part. He didn't seem hunted by what he'd done. He seemed almost relieved. I asked him why. Why Helen? Why any of it? He looked at me and said, "I didn't ruin them." Then he smiled. I kept them from disappearing. That was the moment I understood something I wish I never had. Silas didn't think of himself as a butcher. He thought of himself as preserving something, protecting something, rescuing something from change, from time, from decay. That kind of thinking is beyond normal evil. It's the kind of thing that can grow only in a mind that has completely lost contact with human truth. And when I walked out of that room, I knew I had never known him at all. Not once, not ever.
Cases like Silas Mercer's don't stay buried in the public imagination, not because they are simply violent, but because they violate something deeper. They force us to confront the possibility that a human being can continue to wear an ordinary face long after the inside has become unrecognizable. That's why killers like this become the blueprint for nightmares, why writers borrow from them, why filmmakers reshape them, why the public never quite lets go, because the details are horrifying, yes, but the real terror lies somewhere else. In the idea that monstrosity may not announce itself. It may live quietly in a farmhouse, at the edge of town, buying feed, nodding hello, standing in line behind you at the store, and all the while building a private world of death no one else can see.
The simplest explanation for cases like this is to say the offender was born evil. It is emotionally satisfying because it creates distance. It tells us the offender was never like us. But reality is often more disturbing, because reality suggests a gradual collapse, a child shaped by domination, an adult deformed by isolation, a mind that loses its boundaries, a grief that mutates into obsession, a fantasy life that becomes stronger than reality. None of this excuses what happened. Nothing could, but it does remind us that the visible crime often begins long after the invisible breakdown has already taken root. Society notices the body. It rarely notices the psychological decomposition that came first. And by the time it does, the damage is already done.
I've forgotten plenty of names over the years, plenty of addresses, plenty of faces, but not that house, not Black Hollow Road, because what we found there wasn't just evidence of murder, it was evidence of vacancy, of a life hollowed out and then filled with something warped enough to imitate devotion, grief, preservation, and love, while producing only desecration and death. People still ask what Silas Mercer really wanted. My answer is always the same. I don't think he knew. I think he was chasing something broken and impossible, something buried in his childhood, locked inside his mother's shadow, and twisted by years of silence until it turned into ritual, obsession, and horror. And the worst part? If Helen Crow had not disappeared when she did, we might never have gone inside that farmhouse, which means the truth might have stayed there, waiting in the dark. Some monsters hide behind masks. Others hide behind loneliness, behind silence, behind pity. The story of Silas Mercer reminds us that the most disturbing killers are not always the loudest, cruelest, or most obvious. Sometimes they are the ones people dismiss, the ones everyone notices. But no one truly sees, and by the time the door finally opens, the nightmare has already been living there for years.